And I think sometimes I've talked to some authors who are really, uh, contest enthusiastic and entering all the contests. And first of all, that breaks the bank for one. But
Yes.
second of all, not all contests apply. So pick and choose the best ones that are going to apply for what you're entering.
Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Clay Stafford about insider tips from writing contest judges, including what judges look for in submissions, highlighting the necessity of engaging the reader early, avoiding errors, and understanding the contest's goals and audience. We discuss the importance of submitting polished work, ensuring the right contest fit, and the potential benefits of feedback from critique groups and editors. Clay also emphasizes the value of leveraging contest wins and placements to build a writer's career. And now let's hear from Clay Stafford about insider tips from writing contest judges. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Clay Stafford. Hey, Clay, how are you doing?
How are you, Matty? I'm doing very well.
I'm doing great also. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Clay Stafford is a best-selling and award-winning author, poet, screenwriter, and playwright, film and television producer, director, showrunner, and actor, book, film, and stage reviewer, as well as public speaker. He has sold nearly 4 million copies of his books, and his work has been distributed in 16 languages. He is the founder and CEO of the annual Killer Nashville International Writers Conference and contributor to Writer's Digest magazine with his online column, Killer Writers. And so I invited Clay on the podcast to talk about writing contests and what Clay looks for in book submissions. And this is something that I'm very interested in. I just wrapped up judging for a short fiction contest. And so I'm going to be curious to find out, how the things we're going to be talking about that you apply in your, I think, novel-centric contest submissions compares with what I'm doing in the short fiction contest. But maybe just talk a little bit about what contest you're judging for, how it came about.
Yeah, I founded Killer Nashville, and we've got a team. Isabel Canning coordinates the contests that we have associated with Killer Nashville. We have the Claymore Awards and the Silver Falchion Awards. Silver Falchion is for best book. Claymore Awards is more like what you're talking about. Those are unpublished novels. And so when we're looking, we have a set of criteria for what we're looking for. We've also got Killer Nashville Magazine, if any of your listeners out there are interested in submitting for those. And those are short forms, poetry, short stories, essays, creative and genre, craft articles, all of those things. But all of them, we look for the same things.
Yeah, let's focus at least initially on the novel length works.
Okay, absolutely.
When you're doing your first pass through novels, so do you want to focus on published or unpublished, which would be good to start with?
I think both. Pretty much a good story is a good story, I think. And so I think both of them come from the same criteria. As a matter of fact, we use the same rubric for each one of those for those contests. So whether we're judging the first 50 pages or we're judging the whole book, we're still looking at the same thing. And we'll just go through and talk about some of those things that we look for. I think obviously right from the start, we look for originality and creativity, right? The old canned words, unique ideas and fresh perspectives and stuff like that. I think they want something that's going to stand out and offer something that they haven't seen before. I think we're looking for a strong voice, a certain style, a distinctive and maybe authentic narrative voice that draws readers in. And from reading, they can take make a simple story really memorable. And I think the judges often prioritize entries that they feel genuine and confident, where the writers feel genuine and confident in their writing style.
Can I just jump in with a question? Can you expand a little bit on the strong voice? When you're talking about strong voice, what is an indicator to you that an entry has a strong voice?
I think that it comes from the author herself. And I think that it's when somebody comes across as being special and distinct, and rather than imitative of someone else or some other style, you can almost hear a cadence, in people's voice, in the written part, in the voice, and that's like a really special author who is coming across. They're not trying to, I'd say this jokingly because I think Grammarly is a good program, right? But I say that they haven't used Grammarly because it sounds like they're actually talking to you and it's coming across in their voice. And I think that's what we're looking for in something like that, is that authenticity that you get from somebody's particular voice. Like now, like Andrew Klavan, I'm working on an interview with him right now for my Writer's Digest column, and he's got a very distinct voice. And it's like, I think at the point right now, after reading several of his books, I could sit down and read a book and know, or a short story, and know it came from Andrew Klavan. So, I think that kind of originality just kind of jumps out at the judges when they're reading. And it certainly jumps out to me as a reader myself when I'm reading something.
Yeah. So what are other things? Like if you're looking at, I would think that the difference between short form fiction and long form fiction is that there are more complex components that you can look for in a novel, like plot twists and character arcs and things like that. How much weight do you put on those kinds of things? And, are you reading each of the entries through in their entirety, or you or your team reading through in their entirety in order to see how it all plays out?
Yeah, that's the exciting part when you do want to read through and see how it all plays out. With many of the submissions, and I think this is across the board, if you've got a submission that really doesn't do a whole lot in the very beginning, it's very difficult to get through the whole thing. We ask the judges to go through the whole thing and read it all, but I'm not sure in all the contests they actually go through. So it has to be that engaging thing that you're talking about that's pushing the reader forward. Even if it's an unpublished or whatever it happens to be, it's still, the reading experience is the same reading experience. And so we put a lot of weight on that in terms of the plot twists and the characters and the character arcs and all of the other stuff that's involved, and the theme and how closely it ties. And also, I think an important thing is how well it applies to the contest itself. And you would be surprised at, even our Claymore and Silver Falchions, people enter things maybe in a mystery category where there's not a whole lot of mystery. It might have been better served if it was in the literary category rather than the mystery category. And the authors choose that. We don't choose that when people enter. So I know that, there's like poetry contests and stuff like that where maybe, and I'm making this up, but perhaps it's a haiku contest and you send them a sonnet. No matter how good the sonnet is, it doesn't apply. It doesn't work. And so you don't win. And so part of it is, authors just need to make sure that what they have is what the person wants, because there's a lot of times that authors enter the wrong contests. And I think sometimes I've talked to some authors who are really, contest enthusiastic and entering all the contests. And first of all, that breaks the bank for one. Yeah. But second of all, not all contests apply. So pick and choose the best ones that are going to apply for what you're entering. Or if it's like what we've got where there's multiple categories, choose the right category that best describes it, because you as the author should know the book better than anybody else and know which category it should go under. And so when we get our judges, and I don't know how other contests do it, but our judges are centric in the interests that they have. So say we've got a category for science fiction and we've got a category for police procedural. When we get those entries in, we look at where those categories go and we send the police procedural to the police procedural person and the science fiction to the science fiction, because if you send the science fiction to the police procedural person, that you're not going to get a good rating. But if authors choose the wrong category and it goes to the wrong judge, the judge is sitting there going, what is this? And so I think the nuances of it all, if something is literary or something is genre, don't try to force what you've got into that contest. Actually find contests that are a natural fit for what you've got.
Yeah, I would say that the equivalent of that I can speak to is that the contests I've judged were ones where the winning entry would be published in a periodical. And some of the entries were like incredibly violent incredibly disturbing or really out there. And I thought if I read the publication that this was going to be published in, that the winning entry was going to be published in, I think I would know that this is not going to be it. Even
Yes.
if a story was excellent in every other way, if there was like a lot of profanity or a lot of violence or a lot of other sort of disturbing content, they're probably not going to be able to pick it just on that basis. And so I think that's sort of the equivalent is know the platform you're publishing it to and where it's going to be then promoted. And is the platform you're submitting it to going to be willing to publish what you're giving them?
Well, the guidelines are there for a reason, and read those guidelines and read them closely because I'm submitting a short story that takes place, and the setting is intricate to the plot. So it's a mountain, woods, forestry setting, and so I'm looking at places that take things that are adventures that are outdoors, but just because it says, and it's an outdoor thing or whatever, you got to read closely because they're more interested in the ecology and the global warming and issues. Well, my story has nothing to do with that, but on the surface, looks like a perfect match. But if you don't read the periodical or you don't investigate the guidelines specifically, even myself, I could send it to the wrong place if I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, always. I think for any conversation I've had with authors about reaching out to platforms, whatever it may be, that could be an entree to finding the readers that they're looking for, knowledge of it is very important. And I think that the other thing that I think has an analogy in what you're talking about is that in the short fiction contests that I've judged, sometimes I'll read something that sounds like it would be a super cool novel. It's not really a short story. It's like a description of a fascinating novel length work. Sometimes a really long novel length work too. Like, whoa, if you're really going to explain the whole backstory of this whole other world or whatever, you're going to need hundreds of thousands of pages to do that. With a novel competition, I think that's a little bit different because people have that space. Or maybe the analogy is they're submitting something that should really be a piece of short fiction, but it's become a piece of long fiction. But, just as there are submissions that are more or less appropriate to the platform it's going to eventually be shared on, there are just format differences. Not format in the sense of a physical format, but like a short story that should be a novel, or a novel that should be a short story.
Oh, yeah.
Can you read through quickly and say, oh, yeah, this person, their gestalt is in a different form?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes you get 50 pages like our Claymore, the unpublished first 50 pages, and you feel like they are trying to dump so much information into that first 50 pages to make you want it so badly, when really that should be spread out over the course of the entire novel, all of those backstories and everything you're talking about. And that drags it down. And part of that, I don't want to be trite and say, practice show, don't tell. But a lot of the way they're able to get so much information into such a small little box is they are telling, they are not showing. And as you say, it sounds like an overview of something, whereas instead of writing it like that, maybe write it the natural pacing that it should go. And you're right. Sometimes things feel like they're rushed and compressed when they really should be let go. And then some of them, they start rambling and rambling and rambling. And some of it's very interesting, but where does it go? No one seems to know. So I think there's a lot of writers need to pay attention to their own pacing too, in terms of, works that they send in. And let me, because this just popped in my mind. Sometimes I think writers send things to contests too quickly and they don't take the time. The deadline is coming up. They look and they see, oh, the deadline is in 3 weeks. So I've got to get this short story done, or the deadline is whatever. I've got to wrap up this, first 50 pages or something really quick and send it out. If it's not ready to go, if it hasn't been vetted by your friends, if it hasn't been vetted by your writers group, if it hasn't, chilled a little time for yourself, and then you come back to it after a while, maybe it's best left for next year's competition or something like that. And then I always say, they say, well, yeah, but by then I may be published. And my response is, yes, that's exactly what you want. Yes. So you don't need to enter the contest. You published, you got, because our contests are based on trying to get people published. And so that's the end game. So if you get to the end game before you submit to us, good for you,
Yeah.
That's perfect. So I think writers send things in too quickly. And sometimes I think those things that you're talking about, where it seems like it's compressed, where it seems like it's too complicated. They're trying to put too much into a short amount of space. All of that stuff can be addressed with the proper editing, whatever that editing happens to be, either if it's friends, a writers group, or some people even pay a professional editor to take a quick look at stuff. I've got professional writers who are friends of mine who I know, before they send anything to their agent, before they send anything out, they have their own editors take a look at it and take care of it before anybody ever sees it. And I think more writers would do themselves good if they followed that strategy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting. One of the reasons that I was very interested in talking to you is that every once in a while, because I have a book on short fiction and I'm judging a short fiction contest, I think, I would love to provide like tips for people who are submitting to short fiction contests. But it seems so contradictory. So, for example, I was saying, keep in mind the platform you're submitting to, because you don't want to submit, an S&M scene to like a family-oriented publication. And yet at the same time, when you're talking about, for example, the first 50 pages, I can definitely see a draw for submitters to say, okay, well, I need to end the 50 pages on like a cliffhanger or a big moment, or I can't just have it like kind of peter out. I need it to be like a thing unto itself. The first 50 pages is a thing unto itself. And it's very tricky because I think that the advice can seem so contradictory. I mean, I think another example is that on the one hand, I'm generally, my experience is in short fiction. And so on the one hand, you want every word to count. And on the other hand, sometimes people, like, every word is so fraught. It's like you read 10 words and you're like, I don't even know what I'm reading anymore, because like they must have spent hours with a thesaurus. Yes, it's so dense. It's so dense that like there's no opportunity to kind of absorb what's going on. And you can't give people that advice. Like, make sure every word counts, but not too much, Like, what are your thoughts about that? Like this seemingly contradictory advice that we might give to people who are submitting to contests.
Well, I think it's just be reasonable. Say it as succinctly as you can, but say it where it has meaning. And I think that's probably what it comes down to. I think some stories that are in even short fiction, some stories are in short fiction, don't belong in short fiction. Now, the stories are good, but they belong in something that has more time to develop. And I think the writer really, and that comes from experience too, don't you think? Of just knowing and feeling what this is going to be. I sat down and wrote a short story. I got an idea. I was taking my son to preschool and sat down and wrote a short story. And when I got finished writing, it was 320,000 words long. That's the shortest short story in the world, isn't it? But that was the story that came out once I started. And I mean, that's too long for a novel. That's too long for anything. So, but as I was just typing and it was just, the story was just flowing and flowing. I wrote an epic, but it started out as a short story. Now, if I'd been constrained and tried to fit all of that into, a 5,000 word short story, then it wouldn't have done it justice. I mean, everybody who's read this tome that I wrote said, this is really good. We got to figure out a way to break it up into like 4 parts or something, like that. But there's no way it can be that. But the story has to be all of that. So it's never gotten published. But I think writers need to really take the time and go with the flow of the words, and however long it is, how long the story was. And I think sometimes people write in the wrong genres, the wrong media, maybe, for what they are writing. Maybe, they're wanting to write shorts or something. Maybe they should write something longer. And then conversely, maybe some of the people who are writing, 10,000 word short stories should really think about writing, 5,000 word short stories or shorts or something, because it's all filled with filler rather than something that's in there. So I think sometimes it's just experience, really, can feel. And you get that from feedback from your, your group around you. as to um, what you should be doing. But I think after a while, you start letting the story tell itself and however many words that happens to be, rather than there's no way I can take 2 gallons of water and put it in a 1 gallon jar. There's no way I can do that and do justice because it's going to spill over and just be a mess. And I think that's what some of the stories you're talking about are messes just because the authors didn't take the time and let the story organically flow out.
Well, I think a piece of advice I'm hearing, and I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm not sure I'm convinced myself yet, but that the advice is write the story and then look for a place that you might want to submit it to a contest, as opposed to writing it for the contest. Because if someone has done a Google search and they found this particular short fiction contest or the Killer Nashville contests, the Silver Falchion, and so on, and they say, "Oh, I need to write a story that is," and then they look carefully through all the criteria and they write a story like that, there's a risk that they're undermining the quality of the story they're telling because they're trying to meet a criteria that's already set. So the proposal might be write your story and then look for the contests that match it and make sure it's a clean match. So you're not like submitting your cozy for a noir award, or you're not submitting your memoir for a biography award, or whatever that might be. What
Let's
are your thoughts about that?
I think I think we need to rewind back 20 minutes to when we started talking about the authenticity of the author. And for me, the contest is secondary. For me, the story is primary. The story comes first, and the story has to come from within the author. If you're going to, if there are obviously two schools of thought. You know, there's the contest. I want to write something for the contest. The other thing is, I just want to write a really good story. And if there is a contest, because there may not even be a contest for something like this, maybe I should just try to find, a publisher to publish it. Maybe I should just write it for my own enjoyment. I've done that. Written stuff that I just thought, this is something I need to spill out of me, but then there's no place to go with it after it's spilled out. And so I think the love of writing rather than the love of winning a contest, it's almost like you're trying to buy a lottery ticket or rig it some way in order to win. I think that, so
Yeah.
yes, you pegged me exactly.
Well, an example I can think of from my own life that is sort of speaking not so much to the authenticity side, but to the appropriateness for the medium side, or the appropriateness to the contest, as we're talking about here, is that a while ago I interviewed Todd Galley of Storyaverse for the podcast, and he at the time he was spinning up a platform where they were taking short stories and they were animating them, and they would put them out on an app. And so, of course, I had to try that. So, in the interview, we talked about what makes a story that's appealing to them. It's one that has very strong visual aspects, obviously. It's one that doesn't have a lot of dialogue, because the dialogue is difficult to animate in an engaging way. And so I wrote a story specifically for that. And unfortunately, I didn't hear back from Todd, but I thought, a year went by or whatever. And I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to take a look at that, and I'm going to see if I can put that out as like a reader magnet or something like that. It was a story that was featuring a sort of eccentric character from one of my series that I thought would be entertaining in a short burst of animated content. And I read through it and I was like, there's almost nothing I can take from this that would be translatable to like an ebook standalone short story that someone's going to read, probably because they're familiar with my series and they like that world and they want more of it. And I knew I would need to make changes, but I didn't think that it was completely non-transferable. Like, I just had to set that aside and, say, well, that was an interesting exercise. And I think people have to do a similar, like, that wasn't a contest, but that similar kind of assessment, like, yeah, this is fun, but is this right for what I want to do with it if they're pursued as a contest?
Yeah. And I think it's, there are natural fits. For example, BoucherCon has an anthology, and I wrote a story for the BoucherCon anthology, but that fits right in with what I write anyway. So if there's contests there. And I think writers should look at themselves and maybe just create an Excel spreadsheet or something of contests that are like me.
Mm.
and just keep a running list. I've got one, and just keep a running list of contests that judge works that I write. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily enter them, but I've got lists. I've got something I think I want to put in a contest. I could put in a contest, but I think that that the story comes first before anything else, and then it finds a home. And the
Yeah.
story, again, comes from that authentic voice that I think these judges in these contests are going to be looking at. I would take it that your animated project, maybe they looked at it and didn't think the voice was natural coming out, because that's not necessarily what you write,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think I really think it's the story first.
And I think it's also an example of I'm not a consumer of that kind of animated content. And so I was sort of guessing based on the tips that Todd had given me what would be appealing. Like a character that's interesting visually is going to be more interesting than a character that's not interesting visually. And I kind of, I intellectually understood that, but I didn't have the same deep-seated gut understanding of that as someone who is a common consumer of the animated
Yeah,
presentation of
but that
content.
doesn't mean you can't do it. And
Mhm.
she said it was a great exercise.
Yeah.
And if you did it and it was like, wow, this is kind of fun, kind of working in this different kind of a media style, then you do another one. And, it puts us back to, square one in our writing, but you can start developing those. And I'm encouraging the people, who are listening to this or watching this, that if you find a contest and you write something, it's like discovering a new food or something that you didn't know about. And you go, oh, well, that's kind of tasty. I didn't, the first time I made that recipe, it wasn't that good. I mean, I didn't do a good job with I made beef Wellington, but this thing looked horrid when I took it out. And when we pulled all the dough and stuff away, we ate some of the inside, and then it was like, never do it again. And then I think that's kind of like, some people do with types of writing. But then there's other kind of, you fix this really great stir fry or something, and it's like, that kind of worked. I'm going to try that again. And so I think all of those things, I don't think in writing there are any misadventures. I think it's a misadventure if you're writing and you pay $35 for a contest and, to be in the contest, and that's really not your thing, but you just saw a contest and wanted to enter the contest. So I think it's great to play around and do stuff, but once again, get your group to look at it before you send it out and say, oh, wow, this is really good. Or as my wife told me one time, I always laid stuff when I'm writing, I lay stuff on her bed for her nighttime reading. Okay. So she usually tells me the next morning. And so I think this is a really good thing. This is how you can tell you have a great friend. I said, what did you think about it? She said, not your best work. And I was like you. And I said, okay, I'm going to look at it today and rework it and things. She said, I would probably just throw that one away. And
Really?
yes,
Oh,
really.
that's tough.
But we need those kind of people around us. And rather than try the story out on a bunch of judges, try it out on 5 of your writer friends first before you pay the entry fee to go and have these strangers judge it.
Mhm.
And 5 good friends that will tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the route to go. And that goes back into where I say, I think people sometimes send things in too soon. They haven't vetted it properly to see if it's good. That's why we have editors that we go through, and another editor and a line editor and a whatever editor. All of these editors are there to make us better. And that's what we need to utilize and surround ourselves with those kind of people, and then create our finest work and then submit our finest work to those contests. And I think that's what the ideas should be.
Well, I always thought it would be interesting when I was reading through the submissions that I was responsible for assessing. I thought it would be so informative to people to know when a judge stops reading. Like if you're writing a 1,500 word short story and the person gets to the second sentence and stops, why did they stop at the second sentence? Even if there wasn't somebody there to explain to you why, even if they themselves didn't know why, but just knowing where people stopped, I think would be super informative. And I think that's the kind of thing that it would be very easy, especially with short fiction, but maybe even with longer fiction as well, to be able to find that circle of trusted advisors and say, just read until you would put it aside. It's like if you pick this up from the slush pile and you started reading, tell me how far you got before you would put it aside, pretending that you're not a friend or whatever. I think that would be super interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And we even do that with the Claymore Award in our agent editor critiques. You can just get it and then just we passed or whatever, or you can get a critique of it. And these people will say, I'm beginning to lose interest right here on page 3, paragraph 4. And then they start explaining why they're losing interest. And for us, it's important to know when the agent or editor is going to stop reading that. So we try to make it so that the agent editors can tell the people that they're stopping at a certain point. And I think it's valuable because in the end, what we want is good writers, right? And if we don't get the feedback, then there's no way we can better ourselves. And so we do that. And I think it would be a wonderful thing if all contests did that. And it's kind of like the thing where the old thing where you turn the page upside down to see if they actually read through it, back in the old days and when they got it back. I mean, it's that sort of thing. But if somebody is sitting and talking to you and saying, I thought it was great up until about page 30. And then I couldn't figure out what all there were too many characters. I couldn't keep up with everybody. And I started getting really confused and found myself distracted. Getting that kind of feedback is very important. And so, like you said, you can get it. You should get it from those people closest to you, maybe your family, spouse, whatever, brother, sister, and then work your way out to your writing group. And then, eventually, like with us, you eventually get an agent or an editor, a real agent or an editor who says the same, but it's gone through all this vetting process before it gets to that point. And I think that's the ideal way how contests ought to work for people.
Yeah. The one thing I have to admit, I'm sort of seizing the opportunity to say this because I think this is such an important message for people to hear. And this concept is a perfect one to express it, that I give a presentation called the A, the B's, and the C's of traditional indie publishing. And one of the points I make about traditional publishing is that quality is necessary but not sufficient. And I give the example of the short fiction contests that I've judged. And so the contests that I've judged have been a scenario where I get hundreds and hundreds of short fiction submissions. And my job is to pick 15 and rank them in order. And the first year I did it,
that's overwhelming.
It is completely overwhelming. The first year I did it, I wanted to I almost killed myself because I would read, the entire story and I'd think, well, suppose that could if somebody would work with them, that could be okay. So I would put the maybe check next to it and I go to the next one. Next one would be like, okay, that's a little better. And, by the time I got through 100 entries, I had 15 entries that I would be happy to put my name against as recommending them to go on to the next role. And I still have hundreds and hundreds of entries to read. And after I found my 15, all I'm looking for is something that's going to knock one of those 15 out of the running. And so if I get to sentence 3 and there's a typo, I'm looking for excuses to kick them out because that's the only way I can get to the 15. And then when I got to the point where I had 45, there were 45 that I loved, and now I have to pick 15. That was brutal. And so there were 30 that I loved that I was leaving behind because I only had 15 slots to put entries in. And I love sharing that story because I think it's so important for people to understand that if they send their entry into a contest and it doesn't get picked, you know what? It might be because it wasn't good, but it's not necessarily because it wasn't good. And that the quality has to be there, but the quality being there isn't a guarantee of anything. And I'm curious, as someone who has experience in contests in a much wider scope, what your thoughts are about that.
You are exactly right, because you have to have something there. When I was working at Universal in the casting department, at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, in the casting department, there was one casting director who preferred to have, as an actor, you send in a picture and resume and they're attached together. So you picture on the glossy on one side, the 8x10 glossy, and then the 8x10 on the other. And the way he separated, if one came in, paper comes in 8.5 by 11, right? Not 8 by 10. Pictures are 8 by 10, not 8.5 by 11. So you put out a casting call and you get 1,500, 2,500 submissions for this one walk-on role or something like that. And so they knew that they were submitting to him. If they'd looked to read the guidelines, they would have known what he wanted. But he told us whenever anything comes in where the paper's 8.5 it's stapled or something, paper's 8.5 by 11, or next on to the 8 by 10 thing, throw it in the dumpster. And then if it is stapled, throw it in the dumpster, because he had cut his finger on a staple at one time.
My
And
gosh.
from then on, it had to be glued around, with one of those
Wow.
things. So he was very strict about what was there. And then, by the end, he's got 150, which is a lot better than narrowing down 2,500, 150 that he'll look through. And those that you may have had like the best actors in the world in the dumpster over there, but you've got to make sure you spell THERE correctly if that's your intended way of using it, because that will separate you from the winner's circle. You're exactly right. It happens in all creative thing because there's just so many people
Yes.
wanting to get in and his remark, what I didn't say, what he said, I said, this is kind of bad. And he knew I was an actor as well. He said, we casting directors stay up late at night in bed thinking of ways to, weed you guys out. And having a contest ourselves, those kind of things do matter. And you do sit there and look, I've got 45, I've got to get it down to 15. How can I weed them out? Well, this person, instead of using wine, did wound. And so they should have had it checked. Out they go. And you've got to find some way to weed people out. And so unfortunately, it comes down to that. So you have to, when you're having all these readers around you before you submit to the contest, you really need to make yourself bulletproof, right? Otherwise, Matty, when you're looking at it, that's going to be the little small nothing that really doesn't matter, but it's something that you can justify in your mind to eliminate them from the pool.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, it works exactly right.
Yeah, those are great examples, both of the importance of following the directions, and then the importance of not taking the no too personally, because there are many, many reasons you might be getting the no other than that your writing isn't up to snuff.
And we'll talk about subjectivity too. Add that into the mix. I mean, we've got a rubric for our contests, but we try to get multiple judges to look at it. And if you get somebody who really loves something, and I'm making an exaggerated thing, somebody who really loves something and somebody who really doesn't like something, that there's something wrong, not with the manuscript possibly itself, but with one of the judges, because there is a discrepancy of such a wide, graph that there's no way that it could be really good in somebody's eye. I mean, we've had them where it's an A+ here and then, a total F from another judge. And that gets our attention when we've got two coordinators who are over the judges. And when something like that happens, they immediately pull that manuscript and it goes on a special track. We don't eliminate it, but it goes on a special track, but where we have some of our more people we've dealt with for a long time, judges, read it and say, okay, we got a judge that hates it and a judge that loves it. What do we really got going here? And we get feedback from multiple judges on those when that little flag pops up, because you do have subjectivity involved in contests, and you have somebody who's really alert and stuff in reading today. I mean, you've judged contests, really alert. You come in the next day and you're kind of tired and nothing seems really good at all, as you're going through. And so the people running the contest have to have checks and balances in place in order to do that. And that's yet another thing where you say, it's not necessarily your talent. The judge had a bad night the night before, and it's taking it out on you. And you're great, but for some reason they're taking it out on you. And so the contest judges, the contest organizers themselves need to have things in place to watch for those flags when they're going to pop up.
Well, I definitely try to monitor myself and say if I have accept I would flag things as maybe, while I was working through the pool that I would pick my 15 from. And if I had flagged a bunch as maybe, or I had rejected a bunch in a row, I was like, okay, I've got to stop now because it's like
My discernment is off.
the odds are against that I would pick that I'd like that many in a row or dislike that many in a row, and there's something else going on. I need to take a break and come back to it when I'm fresh.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bunch about things that people should do when they're submitting to contests. Are there any things we haven't hit? Any tips that you'd like to share with people to improve their chances of doing well in a contest?
Maybe understand the contest goals. And as you said, understand the audience that's there. I think we talked about polishing your submission ruthlessly. I think starting with a really good hook right at the very beginning is a good thing. We talked about voice, so that's important. Characters, I think, move everything through. So I would spend a lot of times working on your characters, working on your character arcs, looking for something do we believe that nothing new is under the sun? If so, then let's try to get some originality and freshness for the things that are over and over and over. And I think maybe we could do that. We talked about paying attention to the pacing, those typos and stuff, nail the editing, create a strong title. We know title, we hadn't talked about titles, but titles bring you in, right? And I think entering contests strategically is a good thing. And then realize when you're getting rejected that it's not necessarily you that's getting rejected. You just put the staples in rather than the glue.
Yeah. That should be
And-
a T-shirt. You put the staples in rather than the glue.
And the other thing is after and we've had people do this, make the most of winning the contest. If you place or if you win or if you're runner up or whatever it is, work that, because that is something that's going to separate you. And what I have seen some authors do is to become a finalist and don't do anything with it. You never hear about it on their website. You never hear anything about it. And some of it is, I think, well, I was a finalist, but I wasn't a winner. What?
Yeah.
You went through 1,500 stories there to get to that point. So you're in the top 15.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing. So I think something maybe we haven't talked about is post conference, make the most. I mean, you can buy those little peel stickers and put on tops of your books. And people, that are looking, they say winner of the whatever award, right? Or finalist for the whatever award. And then other books don't have finalists for anything on them, but yours has a little sticker on it. I'd use those stickers. I'd put them on your website. If you got an email signature at the bottom, I'd mention it in the email signature, winner of the whatever or finalist in the whatever, and use it to separate yourself from, because we know that writers as a group, it's a big crowd, and you need to separate yourself from the crowd in order to get the readers. And you're just basically waving your hand and say, look at me, look at me. But I think that's something that sometimes people lose. They win the contest or they placed in the contest, yay, whatever. And then they go on about their life rather than monetizing the fact.
Yeah. And just celebrating
the
fact that they achieved that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think other than that, I think we pretty much covered what it is. I think people who run contests and judge contests, and you jump and pipe in here with me on this, is the same as people who are reading for a publication or, reading at a publishing house or a reader for a publishing house. They're all looking for something that just really appeals to them in all of those ways that we talk about: the characters, the theme, the plot, the subplots, the complexity, the setting, all that stuff mixed together. And sometimes maybe it doesn't hurt to even write those things down and go through, how did I apply my theme, and read through it. And you might just want to run through all those categories and run through your story and go, how am I working? How's my settings working right now in all of this? And in order to create that pristine copy, that's just going to hit judges on all levels. And don't forget the emotion. sometimes we have a lot of plot driven things that do not have stories that do not have the emotion attached behind. And then we have other ones that are conversely a lot of emotion and feeling, but nothing really goes on. But you try to find a balance between those two. So don't forget either one of those when you're pushing things forward.
Well, I do like the fact that with a couple of very rare exceptions, everything you're saying people should do for contests are, guess what? Things they should be doing anyway.
Exactly.
Not just for
Exactly.
contests, just for your readers.
And it all comes from just that organic story that's coming
Yeah.
out. And I'm going to go back to that again, that really what people are looking for more than anything is finding some voice that they identify with, that they love the cadence of, that they love reading, that shares things in a either poetic way or a sensory way that appeals to them, and they're looking for the authenticity of that particular writer. And I think that's really what people should be going after. And then enter the contest.
And then enter the contest.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I
Yeah.
love that perspective. Like, thank you so much for sharing some thoughts about both just great storytelling and contest entry as well.
Which
So,
are one and the same some ways.
yes, I think they are. And so please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Yeah, if you just go to www.claystafford.com and you can find everything you need and more.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Clay. Do you have people in your life who can give you the kind of tough love advice that Clay's wife gave him? The advice that can help you improve your work both for contest judges and for readers? If yes, what is the most valuable piece of advice they ever gave you? I would love to hear about it. Just leave a comment on YouTube. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.